All right, I'm about to let people in.
Thanks. Hello and welcome everyone to the Garden Hour with MU Extension. We're happy that you are here. My name is Debbie Kelly. I'm the field specialist in Jefferson County, just south of St. Louis. I've been gone for the past 3 weeks. 2 weeks I was on a special assignment, so to speak, and last week I was on vacation. And it's so nice to be back home. When I left, things were not blooming. The trees were not totally leafed out. I come home 3 weeks later and boom, it is just gorgeous to be back home and in my own bed. So we're really happy again to have you with us. There's a lot of information that we're going to present to you today. We have a lot of folks that are on and a lot of folks with great information that's going to be presented. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and get us jump started. If you've got a question, you can put it in the chat box to ask your question here. Kathy Meacham is going to monitor that, and if there's a question we can answer it live, we'll be more than happy to do so. If we run out of time or if it's just not fitting in, put your email address there. One of us will get back in touch with you, and we're happy to have you. So I'm going to go ahead and let Pat Guinan start us out. Let us know what the weather is like. I heard it was really hot last week, so let's see what's going to happen for this week. Pat, let's get started.
Sounds good, Debbie, and good afternoon, everyone. I think what we experienced last week is worthy of a slide. I mean, you're absolutely right. We had a heat wave in May, highly unusual, and it was a historic climate event in regard to the extreme heat. And here in the upper left shows that corridor of heat that extended from north central Texas all the way up into the upper Midwest between May 9th and the 14th. It was a 6-day period where it was summer-like across much of the middle part of the country, anywhere from 10 to 15 degrees above average for that 6-day period. That just doesn't happen. And the lower left is testimony to how unusual it was. We went 6 consecutive days where some locations in Missouri broke or tied high temperature records for May 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th. Look at all these records broken on the 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th. That was the heart of this heat wave impacting our state. 167 maximum temperature records were broken or tied over that 6-day period. It's unusual to happen on one day, let alone to see that many records broken over a 6-day period. On the right shows the departure from normal temperatures. Of course, we started out cool in May. The first week of May was very cool, but when you get the heat that we saw last week, that sort of has, and we're running still above average from May 1st to May 18th. We're running anywhere from 3 to 5 degrees above average across the state. And that's thanks mostly to that extreme heat wave that we experienced last week. Thankfully, that's in our rear view mirror. Even though temperatures are still running above average for this time of year, they're not near the magnitude of what we saw last week. Precipitation over the past 7 days since we last visited, kind of hit and miss in regard to the haves and have-nots, but overall, west central parts of northwest Missouri saw some of the heaviest totals over the past week. Pockets of south central, southwest, even the Boot Hill saw some decent rains, but in the blues, that's where the lightest precipitation has been, according to radar, indicated across parts of northeast, central pocket here in southeastern Missouri. Lighter amounts, generally less than a half an inch, but many locations picked up a half inch to over 2 inches. Most of that fell within the past 24 hours. And here on the right, these are all rain gauge reports associated with the Kokoruz network. You can see over the past 24 hours, some decent totals as that system moved through last night and this morning. Looks like some of the heaviest totals are in the oranges and yellows, parts of west central Missouri, some big totals just west of Kansas City. In some of the western suburbs. But here in Missouri, northwest, west central, those are the heaviest totals, generally an inch. The biggest total I could find was here in Bates County in Butler. They reported just shy of 2 inches of rain over the past 24 hours. So that's the rainfall. The soil temperatures over the past week, of course, we saw record heat last week. They've really rebounded. Look at these average weekly soil temperatures from May 11th through yesterday, generally running in the low to middle 70s, even some lower 80s here around the St. Louis area and down in parts of the boot heel, some unusually high temperatures for soil temperatures. In the middle really does indicate, that heat wave that we saw. It's reflected in the soil temperature as well. The red line is what we've experienced over the past few weeks. The blue line is the average soil temperature at the 2-inch depth. I use Columbia, Missouri as a midpoint for Missouri. But you can see how unusually warm those soil temperatures were. Of course, that's reflecting the high air temperatures we saw last week as well. They've somewhat moderated a little bit to just slightly above average over the past few days. And as of about 10 minutes ago, they're generally running above average still in the 70s, even some lower 80s here in parts of southern Missouri for the 2-inch bare soil temperature. Well, we have a couple more days here, I think, of some summer-like weather conditions. Of course, that system that moved through last night is on to the east. The clouds are going with it. Looks like some high clouds as of about 15 to 20 minutes ago. It's starting to break up. A little bit of patch of cloudiness here across north central Missouri that'll be translating to the east and southeast. That'll hold temperatures down across that part of the state of Missouri. Generally highs today in the upper 70s. That is above average still. Typically this time of year, our high temperatures are in the mid 70s. That frontal boundary is moving through southern parts of the state. Still some warmer conditions with more sunshine. Highs in the middle 80s across the southern half of Missouri. So typical more of June than say the month of May. Low temperatures tonight, generally in the upper 50s, a pleasant evening, a pleasant night for tomorrow morning lows. And generally where that frontal boundary is still existing across southern Missouri, low temperatures will only be in the middle 60s. More summer-like heat on Thursday and Friday. Highs on tomorrow, generally in the middle to upper 80s across the state. Again, that's well above average, but not record levels, at least not in the 90s. On Friday, there is another boundary, a cold front that will be moving into the state. There is a possibility late in the day on Friday and Friday night of some severe weather here in these yellow counties that you see in Missouri. So extending from generally Hannibal through Columbia down to Springfield. Keep an eye on the sky for potentially some severe thunderstorms late Friday afternoon into Friday night. High temperatures on Friday, again, will be summer-like in the low to middle 80s. Look at conditions on Saturday. That front is going to be slow moving on Friday night. It's going to linger around through Saturday. We will be in the cold air, the cooler air, highs only in the lower 60s, perhaps mid 70s across far southern Missouri. We're going to be below average on Saturday. This is more like an early spring temperature regime that we're going to see on Saturday. I think the pick day for the weekend will be Sunday as that system moves on to the east. A lot more sunshine, a little bit of a rebound with warmer conditions, highs in the mid 60s to lower 70s. So I think statewide, it looks like the rainy periods, at least through the weekend, will be late Friday afternoon, Friday night, and on into Saturday. The forecast over the next 7 days, it's May. It's climatologically our wettest month. It does look like an unsettled pattern. Of course, the rain late this week and into the first part of the weekend. There will be other systems perhaps impacting our state next week. Look at these totals. Anywhere from 1 to as much as 3 inches of rain is forecast over the next 7 days, especially the heaviest amount across southwestern parts of the state. A little bit of southeast Missouri, they could see 2 or more inches. So it does look like we have some much wetter conditions starting this week or late this week into the first part of the weekend, as well as into next week. This is a forecast for next week. 6 to 10 day outlook. That'll take us Monday through Friday of next week. It does look like near average temperatures, cool to the north, warm to the south. The battle zone will be right in here. And so we are going to have an unsettled pattern with more systems impacting our state. These greens are indicative of an above average precipitation regime setting up. Typically about every week during the month of May, climatologically, we see it about 1.25 inches. So there are anticipating some heavier totals. And of course, we saw that in the 7-day accumulation map, anywhere from 1 to 3 inches of rain anticipated over the next 7 days. Debbie, that's pretty much a weather report. I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. We always enjoy hearing what you have to say each week, so we're very appreciative that you join us. What I'd also like to do is remind folks that if you have pictures, you've got questions, and you've got a picture that goes with it, if you go back to the location where you sign up on our website, and I'm going to ask Tamara to go ahead and drop that into the chat box for us. So instead of trying to find it on my computer here and pulling up the picture, we'll go ahead. If you've got a picture, you've got a question, you can go on to where you register and you can actually add a picture now to your question. And a lot of times that's going to be very helpful for us in trying to answer that question if we can actually see what you're talking about. So that's a new feature that we have, and we hope that you guys will start utilizing that. In the meantime, what I'd like to do is go ahead and turn this over to Jennifer. She's going to be our moderator for today.
Thank you, Debbie. And we had a question that came in about ground covers. And the question is, I have a flower bed that gets full sun and is surrounded by the front of my house, a driveway, a sidewalk, and a concrete front porch. I am looking for a ground cover for the flower bed. Would white clover be a good choice? I would prefer a native ground cover. And Kathy is going to address this question.
Thanks, Jennifer. Just one second. Yeah, and this is a lovely ground cover here that does well in the sun that Jennifer provided the picture for. And this is a yellow stone crop. And so there are several sedums that make great sun-loving ground covers. We're going to put a link in the chat that gives more detail on them and sometimes mentions some of the best varieties. Now, as far as using white clover, I guess you could if you wanted to. At some point, it's probably going to die out. I don't know I don't remember where the question came from in the state, but I meant to look that up. The clover is going to just not perform as well all season long. But I will give you some, I'll go through some others that would do well in the sun, and some are native and some are not. So the rose verbena is a very lovely ground cover that attracts pollinators. So, and it just blooms and blooms, goes on, and it is a perennial. And there are varieties that are native. Also, dianthus is another very nice ground cover. The rose verbena and the dianthus, most of these that I'm going to mention don't get over 8 inches to 12 inches tall. So this is another one. There's lots of dianthus out there. And there's one variety in particular that is mentioned in the guide that we're posting in the chat. Candy tuft, another beautiful ground cover, kind of grows more in clumps. And but again, a very nice choice for a sun-loving flower bed. Thyme is another. There's a couple of varieties that do better than others for a ground cover. And oftentimes you'll see these in between rocks or in a rock garden. And again, do well in the sun. And then you've got thyme. The purple poppy mallow can spread quite a bit. I know some people in that full sun, maybe they wish they hadn't planted it. So just do the research on that before you plant it. Make sure it is beautiful, beautiful plant, native as well. Vinca is a very popular ground cover. Now, sometimes it's very well behaved. In that top picture, that also is a picture from Jennifer. You can see how well behaved that vinca is. In my yard, it's not so well behaved. It's not mine. It was not planted in a formal bed. I inherited this. And so it's popping up around the air conditioning unit and in an area where I mulched and didn't want it to come up. Well, it spread over. But again, this was not planted very responsibly, I'll just say, or maybe the person before me, maybe they wanted it to spread, but it was planted around shrubs when they were much smaller, I'm sure. And now it has just grown out and is creeping out under other shrubs and going not necessarily where I want it. So just know, as always, right plant, right place, and do your research. And that guide that we're posting has got a lot of information in it. That's all I have.
Thank you, Kathy. We had another question come in, and it's regarding peppers. And the question is it necessary to separate plantings of sweet peppers from hot peppers to avoid ruining their individual flavor? If yes, how much spacing? And please give some recommendations. And Katie has experience with this and is going to address this question.
So the answer is no, you do not have to separate your hot peppers from your sweet peppers. What you have planted, so long as they were labeled correctly, if you bought transplants, it is what it is. It's not going to, your hot peppers and your sweet peppers don't flavor each other if they are grown together. There is possibly, if you save seed, there may be some cross-pollination, not likely. Peppers usually fertilize themselves, they're wind-pollinated, but sometimes bumblebees will move some pollen back and forth. So if you save seed, that might be a consideration. And we were talking earlier, it may not be as much as even I thought that was a possibility talking to another coworker. But no concerns about planting them together. The biggest thing to think about when planting them together is disease and insect problems can easily move from one to the other.
Okay, thank you. Well, the next question is also for you, and it's regarding planting pumpkins. Some people plant pumpkins too early and they're ready for harvest in August or even gourds. So Katie's going to tell us how or when to plant pumpkins in order to have them ready for fall decorations and Halloween.
So, of course, pumpkins is my favorite topic. Pumpkin, squash, and gourds, all of those. So if you are interested in jack-o'-lanterns for Halloween or fall decoration, any of those, it is too early to plant. So we want to wait another month. Typical rule of thumb is June 15th to about the 4th of July is time to plant. So you will have pumpkins and decorative squash, all of those ready for that fall decorative or useful. They also, the ability to keep when we plant them later in the season is much better. If they get ripe in August, they do not keep well. They need to ripen during some cooler temperatures. And I've had pumpkins in the house that have lasted up to 2 years. So getting that timing right is important. And we'll talk more about different varieties in June when it is time to plant.
Well, interesting, Katie, that you've had pumpkins in your house for 2 years. That's amazing.
Yes.
I can say that the pumpkin, or let's call it the jack-o'-lantern pumpkin that I bought last fall, is still in my house and it's in my sunroom, and it is not soft. It is hard. I'm just amazed. I'm amazed at how long a pumpkin, like a jack-o'-lantern, can last in a home under the right home conditions.
And the reality of that is that a lot of pumpkins were grown, one for human food source because of their lasting ability, and also for livestock feed. So a lot of that was used for livestock feed because of that ability to keep so long as they don't get frozen.
Okay, thank you. And now we're going to switch gears and talk about weeds. Right now, there is a shrub that is blooming along highways, particularly in the southern part of the state, but you might find it also here in the northern part. And people are asking, what is that? Well, Kelly is going to tell us about this invasive plant, as well as another one called winter creeper.
All right. Can you see that, Jennifer?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So yes, we are going to talk about a couple of different things today, and that is winter creeper and bush honeysuckle. I probably get more calls about winter creeper and a few other things than anything else. And the reason that is because winter creeper is sold as a ground cover in the landscaping trade. Unfortunately, I still see this in a lot of places that sell landscaping plants. And, you know, when it was first introduced as a ground cover, well, it certainly does a good job at that. But once it starts to climb trees or fences or just anything it can climb on, it will start to produce berries. Birds eat the berries and then they poop out the seeds, and therefore we get this carpet of winter creeper in our woodland areas. And it is a huge problem, especially here around the Springfield area, but really about everywhere. This is what it looks like. It stays green all winter long, and it's pretty indestructible. The other one that I wanted to talk about is bush honeysuckle. It is in full bloom right now, especially here in Southwest Missouri, and you can kind of see how bad it really is. This was originally introduced as a landscape plant because who doesn't love honeysuckle, right? Well, it was planted, and again, it became highly invasive. The birds eat the seeds and spread it that way. And it's absolutely everywhere. It's everywhere. And you can really see it right now since it's in bloom. So just, you know, it's all about education. People don't realize that these plants can be so invasive. So we, you know, continue to try to get the word out to not purchase these plants. There's lots of great options for both flowering plants and ground covers. And we just talked about some great ground covers. So we want to just get the word out to not plant these plants and go with some better options. Okay, so what if you do have an infestation of these plants? What can you do? Well, there's a few things there's a few things that you can do, but be aware. Unfortunately, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this is going to be an ongoing multi-year process to get these under control, especially if it's really bad. So one thing that you can do is you can apply a fall application of an herbicide foliar spray. So just basically spraying the plant in the fall. And the reason that it's done in fall is because in the fall, woody shrubs are starting to take resources down into the root system so that they can survive the winter. So if you apply a foliar spray at that time of the year, the plant will likely take some of that herbicide down in the root system and help to kill it out. You can cut it and treat the stumps. And if you're concerned about harming plants near where you're trying to remove this, you can use a paintbrush and just basically paint the stump killer on, like we see here in this picture. That's a pretty easy way to do it so it won't spread to neighboring plants. You can hand pull young winter creeper and bush honeysuckle, especially after a really heavy rain when the ground is soft. But this is pretty hard to do and it's pretty cumbersome, but it can be done if there's just a small patch. Remove any climbers. Again, the winter creeper will climb anything in its path. It'll produce berries and then spread because of that. And again, this, you know, it's going to be a multi-year process. You're going to have to retreat the stumps. You're going to have resprouting. It's just really, really difficult to take care of, but it has to be taken care of because it just has really become a huge problem. If you do have some neighboring properties that are not being adequately taken care of and they have these things on there, you can file a nuisance property complaint. Now, rules on this does vary from town to town, so you might have to look up some of the rules, but that is an option if there's an unkept property nearby. And the last thing I want to say is that if you love honeysuckle and you want honeysuckle, I highly, highly, highly encourage you to try native varieties. And here is an example of one of our native honeysuckles. It's incredibly gorgeous. Takes a couple of years to really get established and start going. But my goodness, it is so attractive to hummingbirds and pollinators and butterflies. So choose one of our native varieties if you want honeysuckle.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. I have to agree with you. That native honeysuckle is amazing. I really like it. We have a master gardener here in Kirksville that grows that red flowered native honeysuckle, and he grows it for the hummingbirds. And I've seen it many times in his yard because his yard is a outdoor lab class for us, for our master gardener class. So it's a neat plant. So yes, I would encourage everybody to grow that one too. So thank you for that good information. Okay, it is now time for our weekly friend or foe with Tamra.
Fantastic. Hold on just a moment and I will get it up. I'm going to launch the poll as well. You should be able to see the insect for this week. The poll has been launched, so go ahead and vote. Is this a friend or is this a foe? Or maybe it's neither, maybe it depends. Give you a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You guys are good at getting those votes in. Here we go. I'm going to end it. All right, and I will share the results. So it looks like we have a little bit more in the foes. Many of you say it's a friend, some say neither, and some say it depends. So let's go ahead and find out what this is. Just a moment. There we go. All right. So I said this one is a foe, and that's because this is pine sawfly, specifically European pine sawfly. It's one of several species of this fly of this sawfly that we have here in Missouri. And sawflies are in the order Hymenoptera. This is the same order as bees and wasps and ants. Well, when I say Hymenoptera and bees and wasps and ants, you probably realize that most of the insects in that order are beneficial to agriculture, and they're often pollinators or biological control agents that can prey on the pest insects that are out there. However, this Hymenopteran, the sawflies, they feed on plant tissue. They can actually cause serious defoliation. The immature sawflies that you can see, like this example, they look like caterpillars. They look like they're the immature stage of moths and butterflies, but they are not. And here's one way that you can distinguish. If you look at the prolegs, these are the little appendages on the abdomen. If you were to look at a caterpillar, you're going to be able to see that they usually have about 5 pairs of prolegs. There are 4 pairs on the mid-abdomen, and there's 1 pair at the end of the abdomen. In contrast, sawfly caterpillars, they typically have 6 or more pairs of prolegs on the abdomen. And again, these can cause significant damage to many of our forest trees. This can be conifer, it can be broadleaf, as well as many landscape trees and shrubs. Another interesting fact about these are the female and the male adults actually look like flies. So when I get an insect that I'm not quite sure what it is, and I think that it looks like a fly or a caterpillar, I have to also consider that it could be a sawfly. So you can tell the difference between these from flies, even though they look very much like flies with the antennae and the head that looks like a fly. But if you count the number of wings, that's a dead giveaway. These have 4 wings compared to flies that only have 2 wings. Now, the reason they're called sawflies is because the female ovipositor is serrated, and so it's like a saw, and it enables the sawflies to slit into the pine needles where they lay their eggs, and so that's why they're called sawflies. A little bit more information about these, and the reason is because for at least European sawflies, the eggs are hatching either last month or this month. So if you have pine trees, you should be looking for these right now. The larvae feed in groups or colonies. You can have 3 or 4 larvae feeding on a single needle. They can be very small, is basically what I'm saying. And the larvae tend to feed on older needles. So in this picture, you can see that it's feeding on the older needles compared to the new needles that are emerging. They tend to like the old growth. So the European pine sawfly has a single annual generation. It actually has a rather wide range of preferred hosts, including Scotch, red pine, jack pine, Austrian, ponderosa pitch, white, and Japanese, and shortleaf pine. So it actually has a wide range compared to some other of the sawflies the pine sawflies that might be more of a specialist. And while this particular sawfly has a single generation per year, others can have multiple generations per year. And this can correlate when the defoliation occurs. So for the European sawfly or pine sawfly, they would be active now, and you could have some defoliation on your pines right now. But some of these other species that are going to be more active in the fall, they can defoliate your pines in the fall, and that's actually more detrimental to your trees. So what you do for them, first thing, maintain plant health. Again, right plant, right place. Should you even have pines here in Missouri? That's something you need to consider. If you do, make sure that you water your plants in dry weather. Anytime we've gone about 7 days without water, you need to do it. You need to water your trees. And if we did get some rain, but it wasn't enough, you need to water your trees. Some other control methods out there, if you take a close look, you might see that there are some biocontrol agents. There are some parasites that have been introduced that can help control. Birds like to feed on the larvae. Wasps will also feed on the larvae. When after the larvae pupate and are in the soil, there are rodents that will eat them there. You can also look for eggs, and then you can remove them and destroy them. Don't just drop them on the ground. You need to actually destroy them. If you need to apply pesticides, there are some horticulture oils and insecticidal soaps that will work, but you have to do it when the larvae are small, and you have to make sure that you thoroughly cover the area where they are. Otherwise, it won't be as effective. There are some other chemical treatments that you can use, and I have them listed there. So that's what I have for today, insect friend or foe.
Thank you, Tamara. I have something that's kind of related to this, and we're good on time. We've only got about 3 topics left. So kind of staying on the sawfly topic here, towards the end of May, early June, we start seeing holes in the leaves of rose bushes. And that is, people call that the rose slug, but it's a sawfly. Do you want to just briefly address the sawfly that they may see on their roses here in the next few weeks?
Sure. We actually have a snippet that we did a couple years ago. And so I will look for that, and I'll put that in the chat as well. But if you have rose bushes and you notice on the leaves that there are tunnels in the leaves, it looks like it's like a tunnel between the top and the bottom cells. That very likely could be sawfly. And so just look closely. If you see those caterpillar-like larvae on there, it probably isn't a caterpillar. It probably is one of these sawflies. And so you'll want to take care of that. You can spray it off with water as well. Just do a hard spray. Make sure you get under the leaves as well. Well, if they're between the leaves, that's not going to really help. But I feel like I'm giving some. I need to share the video because we have some really good information on the video. It looks like scrapes. And it's those caterpillar-like worms. You can spray them off. You can also use that horticulture oil and insecticidal soap. So I'll give you that link when I can get it.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Okay, our next topic is lavender, and I had the presentation pulled up, and now it's not appearing on my screen. Okay, I need to find the presentation. While I'm doing that, Kelly, would you tell them, because we're good on time, could you tell them a little bit about the project?
Yeah, so what Jennifer's talking about is last year we started a lavender research project here in Missouri, and we did that because we were getting a lot of interest from both people that want to grow lavender commercially and from homeowners that want to grow it too. And we didn't have any grower guides for people here in Missouri. So we got a grant through the Missouri Department of Agriculture Specialty Crop Block Grant Program to come up with some best growing practices for lavender. We have got 4 sites around the state. We have one in Springfield, one in St. Genevieve, one in Kirksville, and then we're also putting in a high tunnel planting in Mount Vernon this summer. And we have learned an incredible amount. It is Jennifer, Katie Kamler and myself, and we have learned so much about growing lavender. And we're in the process of having workshops coming up this summer, and we'll certainly share those dates with you a little closer to the time. But today we just kind of wanted to talk about, if you want to grow lavender, what you can do, because it is in a lot of nurseries right now, and you might have picked some up and are wondering how to plant it.
All right, thank you. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about planting lavender. But first, let's talk about the plant itself. Lavender is a perennial plant, or we hope it is. We do have home gardeners that plant it and tell us it didn't make it through the winter, and so it took on an annual life cycle. The plant is in the mint family. It is very aromatic. It attracts pollinators, as you can see in the photo here. Lavender is a desert plant, which means it likes hot, dry, sunny summers. It probably grows better out west than it does here in the hot, humid Midwest. It needs very well-drained soils, and we have found that out at all of our sites, that it definitely does best in well-drained soils, particularly raised rows, or you as a homeowner could grow it in a raised bed or container. It is relatively easy to grow once it is established, and only needs occasional attention once established. And it does use less water than some of the other crops or plants that you may grow. Flowering time is typically from May through late summer into fall, probably with peak bloom in June, with a lot of the cultivars in bloom in June. But from our experience with our project, we had flowers in bloom from the end of May through November. We had some here in Kirksville that were still in bloom in early November. And some of the cultivars bloomed early, let's say in late spring, early summer, like June, and then they took a little bit of a rest period, and then they bloomed again with another flush in the fall. So you might experience that. The duration of bloom time for the plants is about 2 to 3 weeks. And the flower colors range from white, pink, light lavender to a deep, dark purple. And some of us have been to a farm here in Missouri in Centralia, Battlefield Lavender, and we've seen some of the different colors that are available. And we are also growing some of the different colors in our research plots in St. Genevieve, Springfield, and Kirksville. So if you're at the garden center or nursery and you see lavender plants, you want to make sure that you select the healthiest plants. When I'm at the garden centers, I have seen that some of the lavender plants are not very, they don't look very good. They're starting to die. They've got a lot of brown leaves. They just look unhealthy. And I would stay away from those if I were you. So make sure that the plant you are selecting and taking home is green and healthy. You might even pull it out of the pot and then look at the root system. Make sure the roots are white and not brown and root bound. And know that not all the nurseries have their lavender cultivars listed. It just says lavender on the plant label. It doesn't give you the cultivar. Like, for example, we grow Hidcote and Provence and Phenomenal and Super and lots of different cultivars. What I'm noticing is that they're not labeled in the garden centers. It's just labeled as lavender or lavender herb. So do not let the plant get root bound in the pot after you take it home. And if it is root bound, when you purchase it, try to get it in the ground as soon as possible. Okay, don't purchase it and then let it sit there on your front porch for 2 or 3 weeks. Try to get it in the ground as soon as you can. Keep it watered during establishment, especially during hot, dry times, but make sure it is in a well-drained area. Okay, and you do not want to overwater your lavender because it can lead to root rot diseases. And we experienced that last summer. And, I experienced it right here in Kirksville. Katie experienced it in St. Genevieve. I think Kelly got a little more lucky than the rest of us and didn't quite have as many problems with that issue as we did. But I know from experience that we can overwater and that will lead to root rot diseases like Phytophthora and Pythium. And based on our experience during the winter of 2022, lavender does need protection, especially here in Northeast Missouri. So if you're going to grow lavender as a homeowner and you're only going to grow even just a couple plants, from my experience here, I think you should cover it, okay, protect it in some way. You can use row cover. That is what we used at our sites. If you're wondering, well, where do I get row cover at? Check your local nurseries, garden centers, or you may have to order it from a catalog. And then you want to take off the row cover in early spring. And here in the Northeast region in Kirksville, I took the row covers off on March 29th. With lavender, it takes about 2 to 3 years to actually reach maturity. No ongoing fertilization is needed. That's one good thing, is we know that lavender does not require a lot of fertilization. It's not a heavy feeder. Once established, light watering may be needed during dry periods. And we did set up an irrigation system on our plots just in case we had dry periods, and we did turn it on and use it some last year. And that's kind of what got me in trouble, is turning on the irrigation too often. So you really got to be careful with your watering and not overwater. Annual pruning and shaping probably is going to be needed. Okay, you're probably going to need to do some annual pruning and shaping to prevent the plant from getting woody. And based on our experience, we've had to cut back the dead growth. So I did have dead growth on a lot of my lavender plants here in Kirksville. And I bet I cut back about half the plant. So my plants that were 24 to 28 inches tall in late October when we last measured, I had to take down probably half of that to get rid of the dead growth after the winter. So just expect some dieback and pruning in spring. And then proper spacing at planting time is needed for good airflow. Do not crowd your plants together. So make sure that they have good airflow, very, very good drainage. And if you have questions, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to Kelly, Katie, myself. Also, Patrick Byers has been involved with the project, as well as Donna Offenberg, who is doing some propagation for us. So just reach out to us, or reach out to any of the horticulture specialists, and they'll put you in contact with us, and we'll be glad to answer any lavender questions you may have. And that's all I have, unless Kelly or Katie, you want to add anything else about your sites? Okay, hearing none. We are now going to talk about rhubarb. It is rhubarb season, and some people have questions, and we have a video recording that we're now going to play.
Rhubarb is a very interesting crop. Well, we call it a vegetable, even though from the standpoint of its use, it's used more like we would use a fruit in pies and compotes and so forth. But rhubarb is one of only 2 perennial vegetables that we grow in Missouri, the other one being asparagus. It's an interesting plant in that its roots have known medicinal compounds that are still being investigated further for their therapeutic action. There is some interest in some of the compounds being anti-cancer and other human maladies that some of us suffer from. The leaves actually are toxic because of the calcium oxalate crystals that they contain. But it's the part in between, botanically called the petiole, that we call the stalk, that is edible. And of course, as we mentioned, prized for the likes of pies. And for that reason, rhubarb is often called the pie plant. Talk a bit about production requirements for the home gardener. Rhubarb is a cool season, cool loving crop. And very honestly, Springfield, West Plains, Cape Girardeau, that's about as far south in Missouri that we can dependably produce rhubarb. So for that reason, a good idea as far as site selection and sun exposure would be some afternoon shade. Very honestly, I think the nicest planting of rhubarb I've ever witnessed in a person's garden was actually behind their home. It was in Audrain County, on the north side of the home. So it got direct sunlight only during the summer solstice, and after that, during the heat of summer, it received quite a bit of shade, which was helpful. Rhubarb needs a deep, rich, well-drained soil. It's a heavy feeder. You can see it has huge leaves, and it needs especially a lot of nitrogen and potassium. More about that in just a second. Now, not many Missourians are blessed with deep, rich, well-drained soil. So we can help to create better soil structure by incorporating composted manure or composted anything, any source of organic matter, into that area that you want to establish rhubarb. Again, drainage is extremely important. So if the soil is poorly drained, even after you apply organic matter, you might consider establishing a rhubarb planting in a raised bed. Rhubarb needs plenty of room, and by that we mean it might be 4 feet by 4 feet length and width, so that you really need a large garden if you're going to have any sizable planting at all. There are 4 cultivars of rhubarb that are recommended for Missouri in our gardening guide sheets. 3 are red petioled or red stalked. Canada Red is probably the most popular. McDonald is another popular one, and finally Valentine. There are some who prefer green stalked rhubarb, and Victoria is the leading green stalked rhubarb for Missouri. Rhubarb is propagated via crown divisions. If you have a well-established plant or plants, you can divide it to increase your rhubarb planting. On the other hand, these divisions are readily available in yard and garden stores, perhaps in nurseries, retail greenhouses, or so forth. Oftentimes already started in a pot, but other times what we call bare root. The second bullet I have is to avoid using seed. Rhubarb, we would like for it not to go to seed because that's a waste of energy, but it does produce viable seed. However, the seeds tend to be variable because the rhubarb plant or flower is cross-pollinated. If we're buying dormant divisions that have a bud, this is about the depth that we plant them, 2 inches or so below the soil surface. Again, if you go to a retail greenhouse or nursery where they might have them pre-planted in a pot, then the level of soil in the pot should be the same level of the surface of the soil into which you plant the rhubarb. As far as growing on is concerned, we mentioned they are very heavy feeders, especially of the elements nitrogen and potassium. It's a best management practice for homeowners to apply about a half a cup per plant of a balanced all-purpose fertilizer, 8-8-8, 10-10-10, 12-12-12, before growth starts to occur in the spring. You'll usually find rhubarb breaking dormancy in late March or early April. Of course, that depends somewhat on how early or late spring or winter is that particular year. Mulching with manure or compost does a number of good things. It first of all helps to cool the root system, which the plant likes. And if it is a manure that has some nutrients, we're going to be adding especially nitrogen. And as the compost or manure breaks down further, it will help build good soil structure and drainage. With those huge floppy green leaves, rhubarb is considered a water glutton. It takes quite a bit. Given that we are trying to encourage it to develop a deep root system with the loose, porous soil, we water about every 7 to 10 days, but very deep, very thoroughly, and that will encourage the development of that good root system. Rhubarb tends to bolt late in the year, especially when the temperatures rise, and it's a good idea to remove those flowers because we're not into eating rhubarb seeds, I hope. And any energy that would have gone into making the seed, we want to go into building the plant, the roots, the crown, and so forth. Rhubarb has just a couple of pests and diseases. The primary disease is Phytophthora crown rot. Most often, this can be managed through proper sanitation, making sure that we start with clean propagules and as such, remove any diseased plant material as quickly as possible. And at the end of the year, when the rhubarb dies back, then remove those leaves too. Rhubarb curculio and rhubarb stalk borer are 2 insects. However, they rarely build up the kind of populations that warrant control. So from that point of view, rhubarb is relatively pest-free. Now, the question that was posed centered around harvesting rhubarb. And however tempting it might be, for the first 2 years, we ought not harvest any of the plant. We want all of the photosynthetic material to remain on that new plant to feed the root system, to develop the crown, and to make for a larger, healthier plant. The 3rd year, we can have a limited harvest. That's about maybe 3 to 4 weeks. And if all goes well, then from the 4th year on, a full harvest, which is 8 to 10 weeks. Again, depending upon the earliness or lateness of spring, we usually begin harvesting late April or early May, and we can continue doing that for about 8 to 10 weeks. If we would harvest all the way through summer, you're going to be removing too much photosynthetic leaf area to build the crown and the material that will be needed to overwinter and produce next year's crop. When we harvest, we never remove more than 2/3 of the existing stalks at one harvest, and it's a best management practice to pull and snap rather than to cut. You will find that nature has built into the end of a rhubarb stalk that you pull a mechanism, or if you will, a structure that would tend to discourage storage diseases or so forth. So from that point of view, pulling rather than cutting. If you're into producing these commercially or maybe for the farmer's market, we remove the leaves, of course, they're toxic, and we bind them up into bundles of perhaps a half a pound or maybe a full pound or so forth. Can't talk about rhubarb without talking about those of you who are listening who are north of 55 age-wise might remember the Prairie Home Companion radio show and its host Garrison Keeler. And of course, they had a number of fictitious sponsors on the show that they would run ads. And one of them was Bebop Rhubarb, rhubarb pie, and rhubarb pie filling. And as the saying goes, nothing gets the taste of shame and humiliation out of your mouth better than a piece of rhubarb pie.
Okay, and now we're going to turn it over to Debbie, who is going to do some horticulture terminology, and then she will close us out.
It helps if I can unmute myself first before I actually pull up the screen and share it, right? So let's do this now. All righty. So horticulture has a lot of terminology out there, and a lot of times people can get confused with what some of those different terms can mean. Just like any industry that's out there, they have to create their own words. And so horticulture is just like all the other industries. So I'm going to kind of do this in a roundabout fashion. The terminology for today is photoperiodic. I've given you 3 potential answers here. An answer of what is photoperiodic? Is it the period of the day that the plant grows best? Reaction of blooming time to the amount of light the plant receives? Or is the answer the time of day a plant will bloom? So if you can go ahead and put into the chat box what you believe is the correct answer of either A, B, or C, and I'll give you a minute or so here to think about what you think the answer is for this particular definition of photoperiodic. And I'm not as smart as Tamara is to do a little poll. Okay, we see some answers coming in. Great. You guys are pretty darn smart. All right. So what I'll do is I'll tell you what the answer is, and most of you are all correct. The answer is photoperiodic is the reaction of blooming time to the amount of light the plant receives. So we can have long day, short day, or day neutral. So if it's a long day plant or a long day for photoperiodic, it means it requires the longer lengths of sunlight. Typically, those plants are going to be those that are blooming in late spring and all of our summer plants. So if you think of all those summer annuals out there, the sunflowers and the zinnias and the daylilies, all of those are going to be what we would consider long day. Short day requires the shorter lengths of sunlight. And I always think of poinsettias. They do need a lot of night light. In other words, no light at all at night, so that they can actually bloom. And what they bloom, they do have the tiny little flowers on it, but what we can see as what we think are the flowers are actually called bracts, which are colored leaves. And then we do have what we consider day neutral plants. And those are plants that do not react at all to the length of light, but rather how their growth development is for blooming. So roses are an example, tomatoes are an example. And then we can also consider strawberries, so they can be a short day or day neutral as well when it comes to strawberries and their blooming and fruiting time frame. So just wanted to start doing some things when it comes to horticulture terminology. I came across some terms doing some of my research with different terminology. I was like, oh, I've never heard that one before. So hopefully in the future, I'll come up with some of those and maybe I can stump some of you smart people on some of them like they did for me. So just wanted to share some terminology when it comes to that. So I'll go ahead and close this out for the rest of today. I put up the map here of all of the horticulture specialists that are across the state. Again, we still have some open positions. Don't let that be an issue for you. If you're in a county and it says open, just contact one of us. It's perfectly fine. We're all happy to answer questions. None of us would be in this job if we didn't like what we do. So feel free to reach out to us at any time. And again, if you want your question to be answered on the Garden Hour and you've got a picture, we'd love to see your pictures and to send those to us through the town hall where you signed up originally on the IPM website. So we just want to say thank you for joining us, and we hope that you have a great week, and we'll see you then next week.